New videos every day. Psychetruth. Life, wisdom.
Every time you take a step forward in consciousness, you're taking a step forward in compassion as well.
I'm Psychetruth correspondent Karina Rachel. Thank you for tuning in to The Truth Talks. Today I'm joined by Sean Blackwell, the founder of Bipolar or Waking Up YouTube channel. And today we're continuing our conversation about the levels of consciousness. And in this video, we're going to get down to the bottom of what you can take with you and apply about levels of consciousness to actually improve your life, feel more happy, and feel more fulfilled. So Sean, thank you so much for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
In a previous video, we discussed the different levels of consciousness. And in this video, I really want you to explain how can we apply this information in our own lives so that we can reap the benefits that you have reaped from having this information.
Okay. Well, to start, I guess I would say that the biggest thing is that we all have our own worldview, and that worldview and the values that go with it have a certain limitation, and we really get uncomfortable when we're presented information that's outside of that worldview. And when we come across somebody with a different worldview than ourselves, it's very easy for us to think that, wow, this person is completely stupid, or they think I'm stupid, or even worse, that they're evil, or they're really trying to do me harm.
Just because they have a different opinion on things or a different perspective on things.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of conflict among the initial 6 levels of consciousness. A good example of the conflict would be like traditional consciousness against other traditional consciousness people, where you have religions conflicting against religions. Modern society against tribal society, where modern culture is going in and sort of wiping out tribal cultures, those kind of things. And then Occupy Wall Street, that Occupy Wall Street movement was, and it's got its merits, but still it's a lot of people yelling and screaming, and how far did they get? Not very far with the yelling and screaming, and that's postmodern consciousness against modern consciousness. So there's lots of conflict and not a whole lot of resolution when you're dealing with the initial 6 levels. But integral level of consciousness sees things a little bit differently. And to start, they see that level sees a natural hierarchy of things. And these days, especially in our new postmodern world, when you mention hierarchy, people get like, hierarchy, I hate hierarchy, I want to wipe out hierarchy wherever we are. But that's because in the past, the hierarchies that have been imposed have been power hierarchies where, it's sort of like a race, where the person who finished first is the winner and everybody else is a loser. But integral psychology sees the natural hierarchy of things a little bit different. We see it more like a gear shift in a car. So, for example, what's the most important gear in a car?
First gear?
Yeah, first gear. You've got to be able to get out of your driveway. And in the case of integral psychology, first gear is our archaic consciousness. And what would be first gear for us is the ability to survival. And that is instilled in, our very early ancestors who were even pre-verbal, but they had the will to survive. And even in our babies who are crying at 4 o'clock in the morning, and yes, they're rude, but them being fed is very important for their survival. Right. So that's what that's all about, that level. And that's our most important, in a sense, level. Without it, we would all be having early deaths.
Right.
Okay. All right. The second level, in the second gear, you might call tribal or magical consciousness. And there the value is mainly around protection. So we learn to protect ourselves and work in a group to protect ourselves and sort of get into the fold and do what we're told, sort of with a blind obedience, just because that is going to keep us protected in a bigger way and extend our survival. Right. It even starts to bring our culture. We start to have the beginnings of culture at this level as well.
So kind of following into our social norms.
Yeah, we're starting to socialize, relate to each other. That's all happening at the tribal level of consciousness.
Okay, and then moving up from there.
Okay, but one thing that you're missing from tribal consciousness, and anthropologists have validated this, you can read about it in the work of Ken Wilber, is there is no sense of what we would normally think of as individuality in tribal consciousness. Tribal people just don't say, I knew we were going to do the ritual to the gods today, but I don't really feel like it. That never happens at
So
tribal
kind of the
consciousness.
pack mentality, maybe.
Yeah, you do what you're told, and if you don't do what you're told, there's a good chance you will be killed by your other tribal members.
Okay.
That's as far as it can go.
So a lack of individuality or independence.
Zero individuality.
Okay.
Like everything is relative, but compared to the way we live today, no individuality at all. And actually, a niece of mine has gone and stayed with the Xingu people on a reservation in Brazil for a while, and she said, like, even with this tribe that really probably isn't at tribal consciousness now because they've been more integrated, they've had contact with outside cultures, but she told me that everywhere you go in a tribe, somebody's watching you. You never go anywhere alone, and everybody's always paying attention to what you're doing. So this can be feeling very invasive from a modern perspective, where we do like our privacy sometimes. Tribal consciousness, you have zero privacy.
Okay.
All right. Okay, so then the next level up is feudal consciousness, and there we start to see the birth of individualism. So sometimes this is called the egocentric consciousness because you're really out for yourself now. So the birth of maybe the individual ego starts here. That ego is very impulsive. You want what you want, and it's about power, but at least you're an independent entity. You're getting around and at that level, you need a bit of courage because you're sort of standing up and separating yourself from the group.
Right.
And saying, hey, I'm going to do my own thing. That's where that's coming from. Then after that, after feudal consciousness with its individuality, and you see that in a lot of teenagers, by the way, young or children and teenagers who are sort of, hey, it's all about me.
Right.
That's feudal consciousness. Then you have this move towards conformity in traditional consciousness, where people are learning that what their authority figures have to say really do have some value. You're learning that they are basically good, and what you want impulsively is bad. And so you're developing a morality here. So the lower levels of consciousness really don't have that sense of good versus evil morality at all. And from a conformist perspective, they lack values or morality. So, for example, the lower levels of consciousness are much more prone to stealing, for example. Some of them, they just don't know better, and why wouldn't I? Because
I need this to survive. I'm going to take it.
I'm just going to take it. And if you've got it, I'm going to take it. It doesn't matter. Even the sense of private property isn't there among many tribes, But with conformity and authority figures, you have this is right, this is wrong. And if you look at the world's religions, many people criticize religions, okay? But if you look at the basics, the fundamentals about what they're teaching people in terms of morals, the morals tend to be quite universal. Don't kill, don't steal, don't rape, treat your brother as you would like to be treated yourself. These are all good things. There's very little you can argue with, for example, in the 10 Commandments.
Right.
It's a pretty solid piece of work if you ask me.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah, but then, with traditional consciousness, which is about developing that moral code, you can outgrow it, right? And you start to miss a little bit of individuality as well. And at the material level the modern level of consciousness, we have the birth of rational thinking with scientific materialism. And then with that, obviously, comes this huge boom in technology, which has become so great that we don't even recognize it in our daily life. We just sort of take it for granted. We don't really understand that these, my shoes were made with technology. Your jewelry, your outfits. Forget the smartphones and the cameras and the lighting. This is all technology that didn't exist, 130 years ago?
Right.
Before Thomas Edison, we'd just be sitting here in the dark. We'd have a candle. And
Right.
we'd be sharing stories. Certainly wouldn't be broadcasting it to thousands of people around the world.
Right.
Okay. So and you've got this rational mind that really starts to say, hey, you know what? This idea that you folks have when you live by the river, that when the girls see a pink dolphin that they're going to get pregnant. that's not really scientifically valid. That's not true. That's a superstition. And it's only the rational mind that can really see through the superstitions of lower levels of consciousness.
Okay.
Then, we've had the rational mind and the technology that goes with it and this incredible, boom in our comfort level and all that. Then comes the postmodern mind, which sees that there's more to life than just a factual reality and shopping and being a consumer and all that sort of thing. And with the postmodern mind, they start to worry about a lot more about relationships and connecting and values. They start worrying about the planet more. They take a more multicultural perspective, okay? And with multiculturalism, you have, the end of racism. At postmodern consciousness, there is no racism. You treat the other person often better than you would treat your own race. You might think, oh my God, my ancestors were terrible. They were slave owners and, these terrible people. And you start to hate your own self when you realize what they've done to other cultures, And that's never happened before, okay? And then with integral consciousness, you see the value of each level, okay? And one big difference between postmodern and integral is that at the postmodern level, they're quite judgmental of the lower levels. They look at, the religious traditional level and see a lot of racism and bigotry. They look at modern level and see a lot of consumerism and ruining the environment, and they can be quite judgmental at postmodern level. But integral sees that, hey, we've learned things along this whole structure, and that at any point in time, it might be necessary to impose or to use that lower level understanding in order to be most effective in certain situations. So, for example, our legal system is based on blue is based on a traditional authority figure sort of mentality where we've got rules and roles that need to be obeyed. And if you break those rules, you're going to go to jail, And that's important because it keeps society civil, Maybe there's a day in the future when we don't need those rules, but right now we certainly do.
Right.
So that's an idea where sort of traditional culture is the important. It's important to have an aspect related to controlling crime, because feudal level individualism commits a lot of crime. Almost everybody who's in jail is feudal consciousness.
Right.
Okay. And so they see that value, and and regarding the value of feudal consciousness, I mean, the best parties I've ever been to have been pretty feudal. Is that hip hop music blasting, people dancing, a lot of sexy outfits. You got that vibe. I mean, nobody parties like feudal level consciousness, and if it's done safely, then that's great.
Right.
Okay. So, and I guess the one value as well at integral level is you don't have as many fears that you're going through that the other levels do. You're more spontaneous, you're more open, and that deepens your ability to be present in the situation that you're in. So often people at other levels of consciousness feel like integral people are sort of just fun and easy to get along with. It's just a very easy, light person. It's not the top of the hierarchy imposing things down. It's just, oh, wow, yeah, he's fun, he's nice. And that's their feeling, because there's a lightness and a spontaneity to being fully present that integral consciousness has.
Right.
Okay.
So in terms of applying this information into our lives, maybe the first thing that kind of stands out is looking at this integral consciousness that sees a value in all of the other levels and is not judgmental towards any other level that any other person might be at.
You're not judging. When you have the opportunity, you can try and show people a bigger vision of things, but you're not pointing the finger and saying, you're stupid, you're bad, you're wrong, and as you know, in America, we've got a lot of finger pointing happening these days.
Certainly. And I think that, just recognizing that, we all have different perspectives. We all have a different way of looking at things. We're going to inevitably have different opinions on things. And I think you bring up a really good point. Definitely an important, maybe take-home message, so to speak, is that if we can be appreciative of everybody else's different point of view and not, being judgmental on them, then that is a really great thing for us to practice in our daily lives and in our interactions with people.
And especially when you need to work with people, you also need to understand that If you don't have a relationship with that person where they feel somehow connected to you, then it's going nowhere. I mean, you're not going anywhere with that. And understanding where they're at from an integral perspective can help you establish that relationship. Okay. Because there's a way to connect with people at all these different levels of consciousness. You might not be there, but you can sort of put your gear in and relate to them where they are.
So talk to us a little bit more about how you could maybe observe that somebody is on a particular level of consciousness and kind of meet them at that level so you can have a more effective communication rather than just this pointing back and forth name calling kind of thing, which, as you pointed out, is pretty rampant, especially in politics.
Well, I think one good example is that when you're dealing with people at a traditional consciousness, that often comes with a particular religion, okay? And that religion is not going to change. If you're going to sit there and say, well, you know what, there's many other ways to look at the world than your religion, then you're just causing a postmodern fight. Because Christians, Muslims, Jews, anyone who really connects with their religion doesn't believe that. You know, a religion is not about diversity. A religion is about obedience to the truth, which is their religion. Okay?
To their truths.
Yeah, and that can get a postmodern person very angry, and they can go back and forth, but you're not going anywhere. They're not changing. You know, there might be a moment in time when they're ready to sort of, you know, distance themselves from the religion that they're at, open themselves up to new perspective. But chances are the day you meet them, that's not the day. You know? So you just have to respect that. It's like, that's where they're at, and accept them and respect. You know, you're in their house, you play by their rules. You know, they want to get into long conversations about religion, you keep your mouth shut. You know,
Right.
just respect. You know, when my grandmother, or not my grandmother, my mother-in-law asks me if my parents are Catholic, I say yes. If they go to church, I say yes, they do go to church. And then she says, and so why don't you go to church? I change the subject. You know?
Right.
I've got my reasons, but she's not ready to hear my reasons.
Right.
And she's not going to listen. She's not ready to listen. She doesn't want to listen. She just wants me to go to church.
Right.
Well, only on Mother's Day. Okay.
So this is good. So some other ways that we could maybe apply this into our own mind, you know, for myself thinking about it, and since we did the other video where you were kind of describing this, I was thinking, hey, you know, this is valuable because in some situations you do kind of need to, you know, I think having full use of all the different levels of consciousness and a full, you know, ability to kind of observe that in ourselves can be really valuable. So we recognize, like you mentioned, if we were in a state of emergency or in a flood or a storm or a fire or something, well, we would really need to go back to that archaic consciousness and prioritize our survival and really be thinking, oh my gosh, okay, what can I do right now to survive? But then recognizing that when we're working with other people, there's other people around, we're living in a town, we need to share things. Well, that archaic consciousness is not going to serve us. As you pointed out, we're probably going to wind up in jail if we're just prioritizing our survival,
stealing food,
at not worrying about how it affects other people in our lives. But then also, you know, being able to, you know, like the postmodern consciousness, being able to look at the world around us and kind of observe, well, what's positive or what's negative. And then I would just throw in the benefit of the integral, which is that you don't just focus on the negative, but you try to see the negative and the positive.
Right.
And then really kind of think in terms of solutions.
Yeah. The integral consciousness, you're always looking to see the glass that's half full and half empty at the same time. You know, and a recognition that some glasses are more full than others. You know, it's a lot better to be at postmodern consciousness than to be at archaic consciousness. It's just a huge leap forward, you know, and makes for a more compassionate human being. Every time you take a step forward in consciousness, you're taking a step forward in compassion as well. You know.
So for somebody who maybe felt like they weren't really in touch with their feelings, you know, oftentimes when we talk about compassion, what I've really realized is that there's the compassion that we have for others, but then also the compassion that we have for ourselves. And oftentimes that compassion or lack thereof is kind of across the board. So if you have a lack of compassion for other people, you also have a lack of compassion for yourself. So in terms of applying this information to help somebody move up into another level of consciousness or cultivate more compassion for themselves, do you have any ideas for how somebody might do that? Or
Yeah. I really think that you need to trust yourself. And when you're in a place that's not feeling very good, not satisfying you, to look for help. Start asking questions. A lot of people are afraid to ask questions. They don't want to break down the reality. And everyone around you in that worldview that you have will be saying, well, you know what, Karina? This is the real world. This is the way it is. Every level of consciousness is going to say to you, this is the real world and this is the way it is. And every level of consciousness is a little bit wrong when they say that,
Right.
It is the real world, but it's not the whole real world. There's a bigger vision. There always seems to be a bigger vision. And, that's one thing that I mentioned in the previous video, that even at integral consciousness, there's a recognition that there are probably higher levels of consciousness, higher dimensions to take in after integral as well. Okay.
And I think when you mention about this idea that, that this is the way it is, an example that we talked about in the last video is this idea of if we feel unhappy with our job, feeling like we can't quit our job. And I remember my mom saying, well, Karina, this is just how life is. Everybody hates their job. Life isn't fair.
She said that to you?
And it's like, if you stay in that mindset, everyone hates their job. This is just how it is. There's nothing you can do. Well, you're extremely limited. And then at some point I realized, wait a second, I don't have to hate my job. I don't have to have a job that I don't like. So that questioning, just being able to kind of question our reality, I think is an important take-home thing right there.
It's a big thing at the religious level too, because traditional level, because people are, listening to the truth from authority figures. And then once you start asking questions, it really starts to take you out of that culture. So questions become a real threat in conformist traditional cultures. But that's the only way forward, is to ask questions. And I think one of the great insights of Ken Wilber was he saw that an atheistic perspective of modern consciousness, that an atheistic or an agnostic perspective was a higher level of spiritual development than a religion. Now, that just sounds totally absurd, because atheists don't believe in God, and neither do agnostics. They think, well, maybe they're there, maybe they're not. But the reason he thought it was a higher level of spiritual development was because the religions are pushing us to conform, which controls our impulses, but also limits our higher potential. And so you step out of the restrictions of religions when you move towards a more agnostic or atheistic perspective.
Because you've just asked questions of the accepted norm.
Yeah. And so that gives you a more open life. And, even my mother admitted to me, she said, well, if I didn't have religion growing up, I probably would have had more fun. She said. She told me this story just yesterday, that when she was a girl in the 1950s, Elvis came to town. And her best friend bought tickets to go see Elvis. And all the nuns at the church told them that Elvis was evil. Okay? So they're in Maple Leaf Gardens. The place is rocking and rolling. This is the first time Elvis has ever been in Toronto. And my mother and her friend are sitting in the chair, not moving, just terrified, because God was going to punish them. So they didn't do anything. So she really thought back and thought, yeah, I could have had more fun if it wasn't for the Catholic Church,
Right.
So that's just one example of, even my mom is starting to see that, and she's very religious, but she can start to see the limitations that religion can impose on people.
Right. So thank you so much. This has been a very enlightening conversation. And I think that the idea of questioning our reality, questioning the social norms, and just taking a look at our lives and not just feeling like, oh, this is it. Being able to kind of look higher and ask, what is it that we truly want? What is it that's going to truly make us happy? Is really, I guess, the key to unlocking that.
Yeah, and I hope that anybody watching this would question what I'm saying too. I mean, keep asking questions and see if it fits with your version of reality, if what I'm saying is making sense. If it doesn't make sense, throw it out. You know, I don't want to be an authority figure that people just nod their heads to,
Right.
but I'm just showing people another way to look at things that might make more sense of the world we're living in and start to reduce the level of tension and conflict, especially in the United States.
Right. Well, Sean, thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for watching. I do hope that you will like this video and leave your comment, letting me know your thoughts after what we've shared. And if you'd like to subscribe to Sean's channel, Bipolar or Waking Up, you'll find a link to do so in the corner. I also invite you to subscribe to Psychetruth. We're dedicated to helping you take control of your health and happiness. We post a new video every day, so I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much for watching.